Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 discussion. Today, we are talking build theory crafting. If you are looking for a finished build guide for an Elementalist that is everything you need to put together a specific type of Elementalist, this isn't the video for you. What this is instead is going to be going through all of the things you should be considering to build your own Elementalist, or some of the variants that you might want to consider if you're following another guide. I do plan to put together a guide to the build that I'm intending to league start, but that's going to be a little while off, especially because I just want to see if any of the new gems might shake things up a little bit. So without further ado, let's get into building an Elementalist 327 edition. Firstly, why are we talking about an Ascendancy that got nerfed? We're talking about it because the nerf is small. The amount of golem effect that you get by default in the early game is going from 280% to 230%. This is far from crushing. The amount that you get in early endgame when you can start affording to quality your gems, it's going from 300% to 250%. The amount you can get once you start being able to afford decent cluster jewels, you're looking at going from 380% to 330%. Now this will sound like it's a moderate nerf. It is a moderate nerf, but it is still the case that Liege of the Primordial is probably the single best Ascendancy 2-pointer in the game. The other competitors for it are probably the Champion Fortify node and the Trickster's Escape Artist node, but I think the Elementalist node makes a really well-rounded character really early on. You're going to have a lot of power from Act 4. So why am I saying it's 230% baseline, not 150% baseline? Because after all, the notable that grants you all the power is going from 100% to 50%. So don't you just have 100% base plus 50% from that? The thing that's missing here is the Golem Commander cluster, which is probably the best 3-point cluster on the entire passive tree now. You're going to get this about the time you do your first Labyrinth, and it gives you a total of 80% Golem effect. Add that to the 50% that you get from Liege of the Primordial, and the 100% you have baseline, and you're at 230% there. And 250% once you get your paws onto golems that have quality. What does this basic golem package give you? Well, there are 5 options. You get to pick 4 from 23% cast speed that comes alongside enough mana recovery to actually use the cast speed. So this is going to be approximately equivalent to having maximum level clarity for your character's level. Or would you rather have 92% critical strike chance, so almost 2 power charges worth, and also maximum level precision accuracy for your level? Or would you rather have 39% chaos rares and 23 to 35% DOT multi? That DOT multi there, that scales with gem level. Or would you rather have unconditional increased damage, starting at 46% at Flame Golem level 1, scaling up to 66% at Flame Golem level 20, and also 46% increased AoE. AoE is just such a fantastic stat here. Or would you rather have 46% global defenses and maximum level vitality on your character? You get to pick 4 of these, not just one of them. All of these get better when you invest further in them. All this is thinking about 0 quality golem gems. All of this is thinking about having no copies of Primordial Bond. This is the basics. You can get better than these. Now you can invest further to get a 5th golem if you want, and then pick up the last of these that you're missing. I don't generally recommend this. There'll be the odd corner case where it's the right thing to do. But broadly speaking, just go with 4 of them. And also, Carrion Golem exists, but it's kind of for different types of builds. And most builds that are playing on the Elementalist are just not interested in what it's got to offer. That doesn't mean it's a bad gem, but it's more for the Necromancer than it is for the Elementalist. So none of these individual packages is worth an Ascendancy point and 3 tree passives on its own, but when you get 4 of them, as a holistic package, it is just incredible. It's so much power all at once, and it solves so many problems all at once. One more thing I'd like to add in is why we got this Ascendancy so wrong in 326. Players were assuming that the golems would be dead a lot of the time. They're kind of not dead very often, and that's the reason that these buffs have very, very high uptime. This is not one of those Ascendancies where you've got a buff that has 80% uptime or 50% uptime. This is more like 99.3% uptime or so. It will occasionally fall off, mostly after your golems eat a slam from a monster, or they stand in a labyrinth trap for too long or something like that, but it's not that devastating when it happens. Another thing that's worth keeping in mind when it comes to the Elementalist, and I did mention this in a previous video, boss Ascendancies are going to share points with the real Ascendancy that you pick. The thing I really like about the Elementalist here is that the Elementalist has possibly the best 2-point package in the game, possibly the best 4-point package in the game, and competitive 6 and 8-point packages as well. So if it turns out that these boss Ascendancies are slightly better than the King and the Mist one, then the Elementalist is going to be well placed to have a cohesive package that uses 6 points out of the Elementalist tree and then 2 points from the new boss tree, or potentially just taking Mastermind of Discord and Liege of the Primordial, and then 4 points in one of the new boss Ascendancies. Or even in an extreme case, you might take 6 points in a boss Ascendancy and just take arguably the best 2-point Ascendancy node in the entire game. So very many good options that are available to you there. All right, let's start talking about things that might impact the way you build your character. Now, Primordial Bond, we have mentioned this briefly. Here's what it looks like. It's a notable passive skill. It's only available on large minion clusters, and if you're very lucky, on the unique dual Megalomaniac. This has 10% increased damage, unconditional damage for your character, per summon golem. So this is 40% increased damage. That on its own is already worth a notable. Then 40% increased effect of buffs granted by your golems. This is absolutely phenomenal. What this does, because this is primarily available on minion cluster jewels, it turns Spiritual Aid into something you might seriously want to consider. You might find that a large cluster jewel that adds minion damage to your character, and that has Primordial Bond on it, may actually end up being a fantastic addition to your character, and in fact, you might find they're so good that you end up wanting 3 of them on your character. So, this is something to keep in mind. Spiritual Aid is an excellent option. It's also in a good location for a lot of Elementalist builds. You don't necessarily have to take this, but I would ask you to seriously consider it when you're planning your Elementalist. If you do elect to take it, it will change the texture of your passive tree because it will make a number of clusters that would otherwise be garbage tier into something that's compelling to consider taking as well. And let's talk about general defenses on an Elementalist. So you are getting 46% global defenses on your stone golem, and this is going to increase to 50% once you get a quality stone golem. The other thing that's noticeable though is that there's a few generically very good nodes on the left side of the tree in the Templar start area, such as Divine Judgment and Holy Fire, that are not necessarily perfect for every single Elementalist out there, but that do a lot of things that Elementalists want to do. So these incentivize staying left on the tree. You're not forced to stay left on the tree, but you're incentivized to do so. And once you're doing this, you're already pathing close to Armor and Energy Shield masteries. And if you can take the one that I've got on the screen at the moment, 100% increased Armor and Energy Shield from your equipped chest piece, if your equipped helmet, gloves, and boots all have Armor and Energy Shield on them, then this is going to be absolutely fantastic. Now, this is pigeonholing you into a very specific type of defense, where you're probably going to build around Divine Shield. You're probably going to aspire to, at endgame, equipping the unique shield Aegis Aurora, and you're likely to consider both Zealot's Oath and Chaos Inoculation. You're not forced to do any of this, but it's a strong package that can work on most Elementalists. This does force you more onto the left side of the tree. If you're looking for things that are on the right side of the tree, for instance, perfect Agony options, then this is probably not going to fit for you, and you might want to look into other options. But this Armor and Energy Shield mastery is so good that you should be seriously considering it, whatever you're doing on your Elementalist. A bit of a follow-up from this is that you probably want to use a rare chest piece. There are a couple of unique chest pieces that have large amounts of armor and or energy shield, but they're quite a long way short of rares. The only real exception that I would consider is Incandescent Heart, and even then, Incandescent Heart is not necessarily going to be as good defensively as a Twilight Regalia or a Sacred Chainmail that has been rolled for very high local defenses on it. You'll end up with only slightly less energy shield than if you had built purely around energy shield with no armor anywhere, but you'll also have all the benefits of armor. And as much as Path of Exile 1 players like to meme about armor is genuinely quite strong. Now ultimately, this entire package is not going to make you a Trickster or Juggernaut level of tankiness, but you're also not going to be a squishy Deadeye either. You still probably don't want to stand in the worst fire in the game, but you'll be in a reasonable position. And as we mentioned, you are well positioned as an Elementalist to consider taking Chaos Inoculation and Zealot's Oath as a package. This is not mandatory, but it will deal with some terrifying map modifiers for you. You can also elect, though, not to take it. If you don't take it, I strongly recommend that you do work on getting 75% Chaos resistance, not necessarily by the time you get to your first tier 16 map, but definitely by the time that you're doing your 100th. You want to have either Chaos Inoculation or 75% Chaos resistance then. Also, if you're running a lot of Searing Exarch altars, you might even want to overcap that. It's quite good to have 100% or 110% or so that you're Searing Exarch altars that strip your Chaos resistance, so that they still leave you in a reasonably survivable 50 to 60% range, rather than being chunked down all the way to 10% or 20% or 0, where you can end up getting ripped apart really quickly. We need to talk Runegraft of the Fortress. This has a meaningful drawback, 10% reduced attributes on your character, but 40% global defenses is easily worth it. This might be painful to get in patch 3.27, but it wasn't in 3.26. It's one of those things where there's a fair bit of time gating and RNG behind getting it, because it's only available through sending King's March shipments out to various ports. You'll need a fair bit of gold to get started doing that. So just keep that in mind. It's not something you can guarantee getting early. If you're in Trade League though, it's not so rare that it's likely to be very expensive. If you're in SSF, you got to find this one yourself, and that might incentivize you to set up an Atlas around Kingsmarch early on. Now, if you're on a high budget, there are the Grand Spectrum Jewels. These offer a lot to an Elementalist. So, Grand Spectrum Jewels can grant you 3 permanent Endurance charges, 3 permanent Frenzy charges. You're really going to struggle to get these elsewhere, and potentially also 3 permanent Power charges if they're useful to your build. Or there's a whole lot of other options you can consider if either you're getting Power charges from another source, or alternately, if you're not interested in critical strikes for whatever reason. I'm not going to suggest that this is a mandatory investment, but it's one that you should seriously consider because these jewels do actually do quite a bit for an Elementalist here. Next, let's talk about some tips for researching variants for the Elementalist. So, 3.26 builds, these are almost all still viable. They're archived on the website poe.ninja, and they're a treasure trove of information as the Elementalist Ascendancy has not changed very much, and neither have key mechanics that the Ascendancy is built around. There are some things though where players were set up in a way that they were kind of dependent upon a specific mercenary. Some of those aren't going to work, and you will need to apply some common sense in those cases. What I recommend you do though, if you want to get a census to different variants, have a look at various popular keystones on poe.ninja. Ask yourself, why did these players take this keystone? And how did it change their character in other ways? For example, I want to take a look here at those that took Divine Shield next. Divine Shield was used on a fair chunk of Elementalists, not a majority by any means, but a good number. And most of these then changed their build in various ways. They equipped Aegis Aurora, they took Zealot's Oath, they took Chaos Inoculation. Many of them ended up playing Eviscerate Ignite. And here's what poe.ninja looks like when you specify, I'm only interested in Elementalists, and I'm also only interested in those who elected to spec Divine Shield. And you'll see, 85% of people are using Aegis Aurora, 89% Zealot's Oath, and I recall Chaos Inoculation being also in the 80s as well. This is the texture of their trees, and also you can see in their main skills, Eviscerate was used by a large plurality of the players, and then Arc was reasonably popular, but then there were a whole number of other options as well. One thing I'll mention, you'll see Forbidden Rider Soul Sacrifice coming up a bit at times. That has had some indirect nerfs because the unique amulet Whispers of Infinity has been nerfed and Hex Touch support has been buffed, which then ends up making it have a less favorable interaction with the Coiling Whispers unique ring, which is also used by almost all of the Forbidden Rite of Soul Sacrifice characters. So FROSS is in a worse place than it was, and I'd probably avoid that when you're doing your research on Elementalists. Other things though, they pretty much are all fine. But how does this differ when we look at those that did not spec Divine Shield? Here, their passive trees are less anchored to the left side of the tree, and very few of them used Aegis Aurora or Eviscerate. There's much less Chaos Inoculation, much less Zealot's Oath, although those two keystones were still taken by some, and ultimately, all around it looks quite different. So here we have the same passive tree heat map, except instead of Divine Shield being used, we've elected Divine Shield is not being used. And when you do that, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of different skills that are being used. Penance Branded Dissipation, Blade Vortex, Forbidden Rider Soul Sacrifice again, Explosive Arrow, Lightning Conduit, Cyclone, Storm Call. Ultimately, there's a lot more variance, and you'll start seeing more usage of the right-hand side of the tree and a bit less usage of the left-hand side, and almost no reaching down to the very southwest of the tree. So the people who are reaching to the southwest, they tended to be people who are playing the Retaliate skills, so Eviscerate specifically, and they were most interested in picking up things that were down in this area. And as a result, they were much more likely to invest defensively heavily in the things that are available on the left side of the tree, so they took Divine Shield. The people who didn't take Divine Shield, it pretty much excludes all of those Retaliation players. The next question I want to address is, are you pigeonholed into Ignite by choosing to play an Elementalist? So the Elementalist is popular for Ignite builds and it offers a lot to them, but it is not forced. That we're going to have a look at a number of ways that you can play the Elementalist, and 2 of them involve Ignite, the rest of them do not. If you don't go Ignite, you're less tethered to the left side of the tree in general because Holy Fire is just such a good cluster, and that's in the tree northwest. And because that's pretty much unskippable, it then pushes you to take a number of other things that are near it that are also quite good. But if you're not taking Holy Fire, then suddenly the left side of the tree becomes less mandatory to take. This then, for instance, will open up the option of going Ghost Dance instead of Divine Shield, which is going to wind up being a character that's got a very different feeling of defenses. You'll start feeling maybe not quite as tanky as a Trickster, but you'll have some of the Trickster feel of your defenses behind you. The Elementalist Ascendancy also has quite a bit of support hidden in it for wand attack builds, and that's because Ice Golem solves a number of problems those builds have by providing so much accuracy and also so much critical strike chance. This is something you need to get, and it's like having a level 20 or higher precision already on your character for free, but all it's costing you is one of your 4 golem slots. One thing I will say that you might be a bit pigeonholed into though is dealing elemental damage. Now, the best node on the Ascendancy is the Golem node, but the second best node is Mastermind of Discord, and Mastermind of Discord only works for elemental builds. All that said, you do have a cohesive plan if you want to scale other types of damage. You just have to give up on Mastermind of Discord, which is a little bit painful, but it's not a catastrophic loss, and maybe you'll find things in the boss Ascendancies worth building around, and then you could go Liege of the Primordial, plus 2 points in a boss Ascendancy, plus Shaper of Storms, plus get the defensive aspects of Bastion of Elements, all of which may end up rounding out a character well. And in that way, actually, the Elementalist is even able to scale something as esoteric and weird seeming as Corrupting Fever, because you've got all the dot multi, and you've got the unconditional damage that you get from having all those golems, and having so much uptime on all of them. An example of a skill that gets more from the Elementalist Ascendancy than Corrupting Fever would though, is Winter Orb. Winter Orb gains a lot from cast speed, from generic damage, and especially from all the other little stats that the Elementalist is able to put together into one bundle. So let's take a look at a few ways you might choose to build an Elementalist, and let's start with the option of Spell Ignite. Fireball might be the classic, but it's just not a very good skill. There are better options here. Some that come to mind: Exsanguinate, Reap, Wave of Conviction, Firestorm, and Crackling Lance of Disintgration. All of these make excellent choices. What you're looking for here is that you want to propagate damage across the screen quickly. This is where Fireball falls off because the projectile speed is so low. You want to make sure that you initiate ignites quickly because those monsters are not going to die instantaneously. That's why something like Crackling Lance of Disintgration ends up working quite well here. It's got a good base damage, it hits a modest chunk of the screen, and it hits them hard, and it hits them fast. Wave of Conviction is really good on the damage front, but it's not quite as good at the damage propagation as some of the other options. However, Wave of Conviction works really well before some of the endgame options for propagating damage from ignited enemy to ignited enemy come online. More on those later. There's 2 different mechanics that work here. There is Pseudo-Proliferation, as found only on the unique items Beric's Respite and Abrath's Hooves, and there is Traditional Proliferation, which is found on the Fan the Flames Cluster Jewel exclusive notable, and also is found on Searing Exarch Influence Gloves, as well as a few esoteric places. The difference between these 2 effects is significant, most notably because if you've got Pseudo-Proliferation, either Beric's Respite or Abrath's Hooves, it's actually advantageous to have a smaller radius of Traditional Proliferation, which might seem counterintuitive, but I am working on a simulator that will demonstrate that. That, however, is going to need its own video at a later date. The second option is attack-based Ignite builds, and all the discussions that we just had about proliferating Ignites, they still apply here, but that'll be for a later video. And this is Editing Gog, just letting you know that I'm going to play some gameplay footage of Eviscerate Ignite here. This is the Energy Blade version, probably actually weaker than the Ephemeral Edge version, but they do both work. Eviscerate and the Transfigured version of Leap Slam are both quite solid here, and there's a couple of other things that you can do as well. Now, you'll need to make a major decision that will change the way your character fundamentally is built, and that is whether you go Perfect Agony or not. The vast majority of people elect not to use this keystone. It will give you more DPS, and it will do so at the expense of making everything else about your character harder to put together. So most people choose not to use it, but it is a valid option, and it's one that you should think about. And potentially you'll even have a plan where at low gear level, you're not playing with Perfect Agony, and then at higher gear level, you are willing to respec into it. That is a viable option too. Perfect Agony builds will need to have a 100% chance to critically strike, or at least very close to it. They'll need to have 100% accuracy, and they'll need to have fire dot multi, and they'll need to have a bunch of other stats that are all found in different places on the passive tree. That's the difficulty with it. Not saying it's impossible, but for most people, it's going to be a late league project. The third option is wand attack builds. I am being serious here. Wand attacks are not being done very much on the Elementalist, but there's genuine synergies here, and one of the main reasons is that you get accuracy and crit from the Ice Golem. Then you've got access to power charges pretty easily, you've got exposure, you've got shock, and you've got some defense. All of this is the package of things you need in order to make a wand attack build. Now, the key thing that this is going to live or die by is the exact interaction between Kinetic Blast of Clustering and the interaction with the new Runegraft that's being added in patch 3.27. This one's one to watch. The most favorable reading of this interaction is that it is absolutely crazy, and that Kinetic Blast of Clustering just goes absolutely off when you've got this Runegraft. If that's the case, then this might be one of the builds of the league. However, if it turns out that the initial excitement about the way the wording is written ends up being wrong, then this could end up being one of the worst traps you could fall into this league as well. And the reason that I say if it turns out the wording is wrong, there have been plenty of occasions in the past where grinding gear games have teased the way that a particular skill or ability works, and when you actually get into the game, one of the technicalities is completely different. Probably the one that caught me out the worst of these was patch 3.16. They teased the new skill Flame Surge. The wording I've highlighted here was not present on the gem when it was teased 2 days before Scourge League. It was not changed until we actually got in game and were able to get our hands on the gem and found out that it actually did have that wording. So it's entirely possible that Kinetic Blast of Clustering and or this new Runegraft are going to be modified in such a way that this doesn't work the way people are thinking it will. And if that happens, we might not find out about it until the server is live. That's why I want to urge caution here. It's not a guarantee that this is going to work, even though the wording at the moment says that it does work. Anything can happen up to and including the times that we've got the gems in our hands. The fourth option is cold damage over time builds. So Wintertide Brand exists. This scales a lot with golems because just a lot of the stats that golems provide help it. You've got unconditional damage over time multiplier, you've got all of the mana fixes that you've got cast speed, all sorts of good things that are available there. So the Elementalist combination of all the stats it provides really help this particular skill. Other cold damage over time skills don't tend to gain as much from the bonuses to cast speed the Elementalist gets, but they do gain a lot from all of those other stats as well. Now you could also consider that chaos damage over time would work here, but it doesn't have the synergies with Mastermind of Discord. And ultimately, it's Mastermind of Discord that is the reason that I would be inclined to say you should seriously consider playing Wintertide Brand here. Mastermind of Discord and some source of applying exposure to enemies is going to end up being fantastic for this setup. If you do decide you want to go with chaos damage over time, at low budget, potentially consider the Occultist, and then at very high budget, which might exceed a mirror, then you could consider picking up the Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh jewels that provide you with the Primordial Liege Ascendancy notable, taken out of the Elementalist Ascendancy. And the fifth option that I want to point out is playing either a spell hit or spell crit build. That's because you've got cast speed, you've got mana sustain, so you can actually spam spells a little bit. You've got Mastermind of Discord, you've got the option of investing into Reflect immunity, you've got support for inflicting shocks, the default package of Golems and Mastermind of Discord and Shaper of Storms and Bastion of Elements. This provides a lot for a critical strike-based spellcaster or a non-critical strike-based spellcaster. There is a lot there. It's flexible if you want something else as well. So for instance, if you want Shaper of Winter in there, you could drop Bastion of Elements and then just accept that you can't run Reflect maps and you're a little bit squishier everywhere else. Ultimately, there is a lot of support for this playstyle as well. We've mentioned Winter Orb already as a skill that gains quite a bit here, but it's not the only option. Winter Orb I just call out a few times because it was explicitly buffed quite a bit in the patch. So what are my own plans? Currently, I love Ignite too much not to play it, so I'm planning to league start Exsanguinate Ignite. However, I'm keeping open the idea of experimenting with different spells there. Reap Ignite has proven itself quite good. One of the things that I think is really good when it comes to Reap Ignite is that there is the option of getting Vaal Reap. Vaal Reap is just 4 Vaal Orbs on average to pick up, and once you've got this gem, you can then stick it into the unique gloves Vaal Caress if you can source these. This will then give +5 to the gem level of Vaal Reap. This will be like having very early access to a 6 link on your build, because +5 to gem levels is a lot of extra damage. It's kind of close to having 2 additional links. The one thing that you don't really benefit from here is the mana recovery that the Elementalist gives. But Lightning Golem is so good that you're happy with it, even if the mana recovery aspect of it is pretty much going to waste. And the reason it would go to waste is that Reap is a life cost skill instead of a mana cost skill. Now my other plans are that I want to heavily spec into Ignite spread mechanics. As we were talking about briefly before, I want to use Beric's Respite to propagate ignites to faraway enemies, and also chain mechanics, which will probably start out with chain support, and later I aim to upgrade that to the newly added Runegraft, assuming that this newly added Runegraft works as expected. So assuming that it does have the synergies with Exsanguinate that it looks like it would have just from a casual reading of the skill. But again, that's something that needs to be tested once the item is live, and definitely need a fallback plan, which is likely just to continue using chain support or awaken chain support in order to get the chain there. For boss killing, my plans are to experiment with Vile skills that can ignite. And there's a few different ones here. There's Vile Flame Blast, there's Vile Firestorm, all sorts of different options. I definitely won't be a boss killing specialist on this character, but getting one reasonable ignite onto a boss and then refreshing it over and over again by recursing that boss, and that can be done through the Defiled Forces notable, that ends up being incredibly, incredibly powerful. I do intend to stream the planning process on this, and I'm likely to go with an Armor Energy Shield defensive setup, just as was popular in 3.26. Anyways, hopefully this is a whole bunch of information that helps you to design your own Elementalist for 3.27. Once more, if you're intending to play with Ignite, I do want to have a video out on Ignite mechanics because they're complicated, they're often misunderstood, and we'll discuss the differences between the different types of Ignites in that in more detail than we've done so far. But I'm going to leave it there. Until next time, may your Val Orbs give you the results you deserve.